Oh, fantastic.
I love these early ones because it's the same. There's Monique there, who's the same, often joins at this time as well. It's quite nice. I sort of see the same faces, you know, as I switch on.
Yeah.
The only thing I suppose we have to watch is that this is all being recorded.
Oh, of course, yes, yes.
So, I mean, I could stop it and start it, but I did that once and then forgot to restart it.
Oh. Yeah.
So I'm gonna start the music now, okay?
Okay, fine. I'll put my my mic off then.
Okay. Hi, good morning, everybody. Today we have Shafiq once more to come and talk to us, being the expert of stories behind the headlines. I think today's episode, let's say, will be most interesting, and I expect some very challenging questions. China, mega infrastructure projects, domestic and global. Shafiq, over to you.
Thank you, Jilly. As ever, very grateful to you for the introduction and getting us going on the Zoom. I'm going to be changing over the sharing to my own sort of screen. And I'm going to be putting up this agenda for us to consider. And it covers a fair amount of areas again. My usual way of approaching the types of talks that we have is to present a large overview of things so that we don't get lost, if you like, looking at the trees, lose the woods, as it were. I'm going to start off by showing you a clip where Professor Jeffrey Sachs, you might remember him, he was also one of the speakers of the REIT lecture some years ago, very renowned sort of professor for Columbia University, USA. And he's going to have his view, which I think are fairly objective, on how we should look at China. Because as you know, the Chinese sort of news on our media is very negative. And with the result that we all think of China as being the big enemy ready to take over and so on. It is not so. We have a tendency to sort of highlight the shortcomings of other nations, in the media especially, and we need to be careful. And I think at this particular moment, what USA is doing is, of course, with Trump in the lead, going off the rails, as it were, against China. So let me play that clip of Professor Jeffrey Sachs, and we can then sort of come back to this agenda today again, this clip. I'm going to share this one. Here we are. Let me just show you his basic sort of, if you like, standing. I think he's been interviewed at the moment by this lady for CNN.
I want to start off with what you see as the current state of the U.S. and the global economy.
Clearly, we're in a mess, the worst economic crisis in decades. And I think it will remain this way as long as we have a pandemic. In other words, as long as COVID-19 is spreading, is not decisively contained. It's possible that the virus can be contained either through public health or the good luck of a vaccine. That would change the picture quite a bit. But if you consider the current situation in the United States of a runaway pandemic, a lack of any clear public policy, no vaccine within sight for the moment, I think we have to say that this is a very deep crisis that's likely to persist.
What's your view of what the economy will look like on the other side, and how soon is the other side?
The only way we could have had a V-shaped recovery is if we had contained the virus quickly. China is the exemplar of a country that had actually a runaway pandemic. It had the first one in Wuhan, but it got it under control, and now China is recovering. There is enough. This one would be even more dangerous. It's completely misconceived and misguided, but a lot of Americans want to put it to China and think that we run the show and all the rest, which is a very dangerous way of thinking, actually.
So what's your view of the U.S.-China relationship? Is it going to continue this escalation that we've seen in the past few months? Will there be some sort of reconciliation? How do you see that playing out?
What people say about China is, to put it plainly, stupid. People who don't know, who have this weird image of this totalitarian monster out to take over the world. That is lazy, but not completely atypical American thinking in the past. China's not out to take over the world. China's not out to do all these terrible things. China wants to have a normal, decent life like Americans want to have. China lives at a living standard something like a third or a fourth or even a fifth of Americans. They want their place in the sun also. It doesn't mean they're taking over. But this heated idea that they ripped us apart, they did this terrible thing, they did that terrible thing, this has become bipartisan. It can become very, very dangerous in the future. While politics is a game, and a pretty tough one in the US, it's an incredibly dangerous sport also. And to play with the facts and the lies that we're saying about China right now has consequences.
But from a pure economic perspective, could China still become the world's biggest economy?
Well, let's put it this way. In terms of aggregate gross domestic product, if measured at international prices, so-called, purchasing power adjusted, China already is the world's biggest economy. But not surprising, because China has 4 times the population of the United States, and it has a per capita income in those international dollars of about a third of the US. So it's 4/3 larger than the United States in aggregate terms. China does not live at the level of affluence of American citizens on average, but it's a very big country.
You have been an advocate of social democracy, systems like...
Okay, I'm going to be going back to the my screen now, and we'll pick it up from there. Okay, here we are. So because this thing is recorded, you can look at the full clip, which I've referenced over here. So those who wish to pursue, along with the other material that I'm going to be presenting you today, you can look at it in a bit more detail. Because the time that we have is not going to enable us to go into a lot of detail on a lot of these fronts, because we cover a large area. Now, what is it that's propelling China to do what it's doing? Well, the first thing, of course, is the population, the pressure of population. And it has a history of poverty, which it has tried to elevate as well. And then has to deal with the climate problems as well. It's got a big desertification happening, the desert extending itself into northern China. And in order to try and deal with these larger, big issues that it's facing, it's dealing with it, of course, in a manner which I think is very commendable. Of course, it's, despite the fact it's a big polluter at the moment, its energy sort of policies are on a grand scale, and it's something that I'll show you as we progress, what sort of projects are underway to try and deal with that. And of course, we need to focus on energy, because it's the basis of practically everything that we are engaged in to consume and for transport or whatever. Energy is the basis of that, and we need to have clean energy in order to save our climate. And of course, to be able to try and better the lives of people, you need to have infrastructure, economy. And without infrastructure, countries can't get much headway. And infrastructure is a must. So we'll see very, very quickly what they're doing on the transport front. They're planning for mega cities because they're very long-term thinkers. And of course, their communications and their technology, and of course, the economy where they are at the moment. And that's on the domestic front. We're going to be looking at the international sort of projects as well. And of course, the biggest one of that is the BRI, which is the New Silk Road, the Belt and Road Initiative, which ties Europe, Asia, and Africa to China. And of course, as a result of that, the geopolitics, the consequences of that, and strategic sort of implications, and the trade implications. So let's move on. That's what I've just said. They've got a number of programs because, you know, China has long-term vision. They go about it in a very methodological way in order to sort of deliver the sort of solutions. Now, one of the things is, of course, the New World Order. This is a phrase that has been used quite a lot, and that was used from the time, I think, for 70 years ago after the Second World War, when all these institutions were set up to try and deliver on what the vision was of that day, which is, of course, no war, free markets, and equality, and free press, and so on. Now the things have changed. We have found that the quality has not diminished too much. There are many more billionaires than there were, and just a few of them own half the wealth of the world. So inequality is also rampant. So these models need to be looked at in a different way. And of course, there is this narrative as well that we get to hear about going it alone. An example of that is, again, Brexit, which I think is quite a sorry state of affairs. And of course, Trump with walls and so on. So it's a sort of type of mindset which is taking us away from the vision that was there before. So now the vision that China and Asia is talking about is not a new world order, but an international order, which means that you need to approach it multilaterally, you know, in decision making and the efforts towards bettering the world situation, be it climate, be it trade, be it, you know, upliftment of the of the poverty and so on all over the world, and health, of course, not to forget that. And to that sort of end, they have also come up, China, with their own equivalent, not equivalent quite, but similar to our OECD and G8 and G7 type of talking shops. And they call them the SCO, that's the Shanghai Cooperative Organization. They've got those few countries together. We'll talk about it a little bit more as to who belongs there. And of course, they've got this, the equivalent of the World Bank, which is the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. So these are things, again, we'll talk about, all to support this big vision of Belt and Road Initiative, which I'll talk about in a little while. Okay, so they are going to be delivering, you know, these mega projects with towards that what end? Because we said the population pressure is there, not only in China, but all over the world. And we have seen how this thing has risen up, you know, exponentially, as it were. We are down to this 7-8 billion now. And of course, a couple of centuries or even more, you know, it was quite small. So we are expanding very rapidly on the population front, and those are the pressures that are put on the countries to deliver on solutions. Now, along with the numbers, we also have this demographic issues that we need to sort of consider. If you look at this red area here, that's the 19th century. The life expectancy was around about 25, 30, see, around here. Then in the 20th century, that's the 1950s and so on, you had the doubling of life expectancy. This is the yellow area here. And of course, we are in the 21st century now. The life expectancies are about 70 to 80 years. So we have, in fact, quite a big change. So not only are the numbers growing in population-wise, but also we are living longer. So we need to deal with those types of issues. And of course, China is doing what it can to for its country. Now, this is another sort of picture. I'll skip that. Useful to look at this. What's this population doing in terms of individual countries? So China has increased quite a lot, but it starts to diminish. This, I think, is a result of that one-child policy, you might remember. And now they have reversed much of that, and because they're short of manpower, would you believe? So because they have an aging population as well to some extent, and they need workers. So this population is going down in case of China. But in India, it's still keep rising. So they'll cross over and beat China's population, you know, within the decade, I think. In Europe, this is Europe here, the blue line. we are maintaining a sort of a level which is quite low or similar. And that's because with the aging population and no immigration coming in, except for Germany. So there is this sort of steady sort of line there. But that is going to be, of course, a problem because the aging population requires pensions and this, that, or the other, and it needs to be having workers. And hopefully the workers are going to be robots of the future. USA is still growing a bit, mainly because of its immigrant policy, and they're producing larger families on the whole, I think. As far as the makeup of the populations, the rural and urban, you can see the rural populations are going down because the agriculture economy is, we've left that behind. We've moved into an industrial sort of economies. So that means, and services, and you've got these urban population rising. So you've got those types of things also keep in mind when we are planning for future and for the projects that need to be delivered to solve the problem. Now, one of the big things of China is that it's got a desertification problem. Desert is moving in from the north, as can be seen from here. This is all this arid area here. That's China. You can see it's a pretty sort of green here, and that's Tibet and the Himalayas here. But this area is pretty sort of the Mongolian area and the desert there. Very arid land, and they're trying to do something about it. And what they're trying to do is to stop that encroachment of desert coming into China. And they have been working on it for a long time, and we'll see what they're doing about that. So, because what happens is, of course, it takes away a lot of this arable good land. Although it's arid at the moment, they want to reclaim it. So how they're going to reclaim it is, of course, to make it into a green wall, plant more trees. And this gives you an idea as to how big that sort of area is. It's got about nearly 5,000 kilometers sort of wide here and 1,500 kilometers thick. So it's a pretty large area that needs to be dealt with. And how they're dealing with it? Well, basically, for decades, they have been planting trees along the dry rim of the desert, a project that will take 50 more years to complete. So it's a long-term thing. There's no sort of short-term solution. But trees are going to be the solution for that encroachment of the desert. I think some other countries are also doing it, but China is doing it in a massive way, as it always does, huge sort of scale. Now, this is what it looks like. This desert has become green because all these trees that have been planted, you can see they're all in rows over there. And they have reclaimed annually something of the order of 850 square kilometers. So that's quite a big number. And they've done it over the past 15 years. So you can see they're claiming at a high rate, and that's very, very good land for the future for them to use. Now, they are also engaged in poverty alleviation, and they have done that for 700 to 800 million people lifted out of poverty. Now, that's a humongously sort of big effort which they have done, and they've done it only in the last few decades. And that's a very commendable thing. We don't hear too much about it, but here I think we can see. Now, these graphs show you different lines for different years, 1990, 2010, and 2020. The light blue is 2020. Now, what do these show? These shows that the purchasing, the expenditure of poor people is of this order, $1.25 per day. And so many people were in fact influenced, affected, they were in that range. That's why you've got this bulge. So this is the number at that time. So you have a bettering of the situation as time goes on. 2010, they have really pressed back that hump. And now in the 2020s, you can expect these people who are spending $1.25 to spending about $5 to $6 on their living. So they have improved their standards quite a bit. Now, India has done that, but they still have big humps and big sort of ranges here, and sub-Saharan Africa as well. So China has done a remarkable job of uplifting so many people out of poverty. How have they gone about it? Because, you know, to uplift poverty, it means that you have to look at what the basic problem of the people is. And they have found what the reasons were by looking at this, compiling huge amounts of data of every individual family. So they have collected in enormous amounts of data so as to shift it through and see what needs to be done in order to help these families and help these villages. And the way that they go about it, of course, is in a very organized manner. And that's why they have a huge amount of data based on that. And here we are, okay, this is showing us how many people have been lifted out of poverty. It used to be about 700 in poverty, and now we've got very few there. So how do they do it? Well, they look at each village, for instance, and they sort of break it down into see what it is that it needs. Like, for instance, this village A needs jobs, it needs supplies, and it needs money. While village B needs money, of course, and this line here, opportunities, maybe for its products. Village C requires, of course, jobs and supplies, and of course, training of its individuals. And village D here wants training and, of course, opportunity for export. So you can see different villages have different types of needs, and they have been able to put together programs to help them. And how they have, in fact, done that actually is after having made the necessary programs that were workable, they then sent in, after a couple of years, students from universities to assess the effectiveness of the programs. And of course, they're a third party and they have no particular interest in either speaking the government language or the people's language. They have taken it as an academic type of exercise and gauged the effectiveness of that. And they have found that they have succeeded very substantially. And that's why we have this figure of 700 to 800 million people out of poverty. Now we can see the share of China's sort of GDP, if you like, by the 2030 is going to be about a third of the global one, quite a big one. India will be about a fifth, and of course USA is there and Europe is here. So you can see in Asia you're going to have more than half of the, and if you bring in, you know, the Japan and all the others, the GDP of Asia is going to be enormous. And that's what is being said over. Okay, I'll just come back to that again. But here, because my slides are in this order, I'll just talk about it. Because America and China are the two biggest sort of exporters, it's good to be able to compare them. And China, as you can see, has really made remarkable progress only in the last 20 years. You know, export-wise, enormous amount of change. And of course, America is being you know, regarded as the biggest power, and therefore comparison over there are useful. And China has overtaken it about 10 years ago, in fact. That's the GDP. GDP still very much less than the USA. USA is about 20 trillion, 21 trillion. I think this one is about 12, 13 trillion. So, but still way to go. But as Jeffrey Sachs says, this doesn't really tell us the true figure, because this is one metric, as it were, of gauging how well the country is doing in terms of its productivity and so on, what the goods that it produces. But because of this PPP type of metric, which is taking into account the value of the dollar in each country, because in China, the dollar will go a lot further than in America. So the purchase power of China would be a lot more for that dollar. So their money that they have gets them a lot more goods, if you like, and services. Now, this is basically showing that the shift of this economic power is moving for the reasons that we've just said. You know, they're doing their exports quite a lot, and they have embarked on big projects to be able to sort out the requirements of their country. Now, one of the things, of course, is this infrastructure that they're building, the railways. I had a student last year who went over to China, and he came back because, he was quite sort of full of praise for the Chinese trains. He said they were so fast, so clean, and so smooth. He was quite, astounded by it. And they have plenty of these types of trains over there. I'll show you how big that network is. And of course, along with the railways, for the infrastructure, you need the ports as well to bring in the goods and to export them as well. And they have lots of them. I'll show it to you, a few of them, in that BRI map that I'll show you. And of course, they're building these highway. BRI also means Belt and Road Initiative. This is a picture of a road going through the Karakoram. And when I talk about Pakistan on the 4th of September, I will go into a little bit more detail about this Belt and Road Initiative, focusing a little bit more on detail of what it actually means for each country. So you've got these highways going through these mountains, which opens up the Western China, if you like, to some well-being. So they support the highway. And now this is the real network. See how extensive it is. It's got something like 16,700 miles of fast, this is fast, not just railways, but fast railways, high speed, which runs over 200-300 kilometers an hour. So if you look at this map, compare it to, say, us over here, we've got only 855 miles of fast network. I think that has to do with that Eurostar type of link that we've got at the moment. And maybe when we get the HS2, this might sort of increase in number. You've got France, which is a bit more. They've got the TGV, which takes you from Paris right up to the south of France. I've been on that. It's a very, very fast train, very smooth, very good. They've got about 3,000 kilometers there. And of course, USA is very poorly. There hasn't hardly any. Maybe one of the reasons is, I'll just show it to you in the next slide as to what it is. So all in all, what it means is that you've got China's network is humongous compared to the rest of the world. Okay, they want to target, have a target of 35,000 kilometers. So they're building at an enormous rate to bring in the tracks necessary. Now you can see this is focused basically on the eastern side of China. And if you're in the west, it's pretty sort of thin here. That's where the least economic development is, because they don't have infrastructure there. And this is where the focus is starting to come towards developing that region by connecting it to other sort of countries in the neighborhood. Like one connection is, of course, to Pakistan, and then the other connections are to all the stans that belonged to the Soviet Republic before, but which are poor but resource rich, so they are going to be connected as well. Now, why is it that USA doesn't have, I think the cost of building this high speed in USA is $150 million practically per mile, whereas it's 30, which means it's about, the US is about 5 times the cost of what you can do. So for 1 mile in California, you can build 5 miles in China. Now, that's another project that I've put in to show that China is not necessarily just talking about terrestrial matters, but they're talking about space. Now, initially, they were kept out of the space station for political reasons, but they have their own space station that they are launching, and they're making quite a big headway, as you can see. This is the detail. I won't go right now, but you can look at it if you get your clip and look at it in detail. This is just to show that they are making quite a lot of progress, and this progress can be highlighted here as to what it actually means. For instance, we hear about the SpaceX. That's Elon Musk's type of company, which is trying to put people into Mars sooner or later. And his plan is to try and put somebody up there in Mars by 2026, which is quite an ambitious program. But, I mean, he does have ambitious goals, so let's hope that he also succeeds there. Now, along with NASA, also, they want to put somebody in Mars by 2033, rather. European effort is a bit behind. They're still trying to put landers in Mars here. That's Mars. China has also sort of in fact, they sent off a rocket just last week to Mars, and they are going to be putting a manned mission as well from 2030 to 2060. So they're not they're behind, but not that far behind. The two leaders in this game are, of course, SpaceX and NASA. So they are sort of into the extraterrestrial type of area as well. Now, this is just to show that, they're not necessarily just talking about plans, but they have actually landed on the other side of the moon. This is the only country that has done it. So they have the technology and the techniques to be able to do some fairly sophisticated stuff. Now, we talked about infrastructure, and here bandwidth is one of the main things, because that gives us the connectivity that is required. And of course, there was talk about Huawei and now TikTok and so on. But this is just going back to how China was. It was not having anything that was measurable by about 40 years ago. But 20 years ago, they started to make their appearance in having installed bandwidth, which was increasing quite a lot. And now they have a large, more than the United States, the connectivity and the speed is there. And the speed comes from this 5G, which is Huawei, which I think we talked about it sometime in my other lectures. Perhaps we will get this 5G underway, but unfortunately, Boris has caved into US pressure and said, no, we don't want Huawei, which I think is a very bad decision. We'll be left behind in some of the advanced technologies that are really the future of countries like UK. Now, where do we stand on the technology innovation front? The leader, of course, is USA, Silicon Valley and so on. And China has come up the area called Xinjiang, I think, somewhere in the south of China. They're catching up very fast. And that's India. And there's UK. UK is also sort of not too far behind, but still not like the big players. These are the innovation sort of centers. There's Shanghai, which is #1. There's New York 2, Tokyo and Beijing. That's at #3. London at 5. These are the Washington, Berlin, Chicago, Tel Aviv, and Boston. And all this ranking over here. So you can see there are about 4 centers of USA here, which means it's quite widespread. So USA is still not too far. That's still leading very much, the leader. But with 2 presidents of here, of Shanghai and Beijing, they're making their presence felt. And they have a lot of patents registered every year. So they are making big headway on that front. Okay, with all this work that they are doing and promoting, all sorts of industries and so on, there's a cost to it. The cost is, of course, in pollution. Now, they have been the biggest emitter of CO2, and you can see from this, China is the leading one, something of the 10 million kilotons, that translates to billions of tons of CO2 going into the atmosphere. Second to China, of course, is USA. Although they're about half the number of size and in numbers. Then you've got the European Union. And of course, we are here somewhere down there. We're not terribly bad compared to all the big boys over here. But still, I think we need to have policies which are green. And I think right now, it's a good time to try and force the corporate world, because we're giving them so many loans and so on, to move towards greener energies. Okay, one of the things that China is doing, because it's a big sort of polluter, is going in for greener energies. And of course, one of the greenest energies is hydropower. They built these 3 gorgeous dams, the world's largest power station by capacity. And they will be producing enormous amounts of power. And I think this like 22 gigawatts. Normally, when you hear about a dam, we hear about so many thousands of megawatts being produced, or hundreds of megawatts, but this is going into gigawatts over here. It's quite a big number. They're going in for, of course, more nuclear power as well. They've already got these number of reactors in operation. They're building 24 more. And that's going to be, of course, cleaner energy. But of course, it has a cost because, these are reactors which are based on fission technology, which means we break the atoms and draw energy from it. But then it has a bad residual, if you like plutonium. In fact, I seem to remember that Nixon was the one who decided to go for fission type of reactors and withheld the funds from the fusion, not the fusion, but the other fission, which was thorium. That was a much more safer type of nuclear fission reactors. But Nixon went in because the uranium fission gave plutonium, which was useful for the bomb making. So you can see how big decision can be made by politicians, which are really bad for the world. So we have thorium still very much in the sidelines at the moment. It'll come into operation sooner or later because it's good technology. It needs to be developed and needs to be funded a bit more. But of course, we are basing that all on fission and not on fusion. Okay, wind farm as well here, one of the largest here in the world. It produces 20 gigawatts, which is quite a big number again. So they are putting in big projects which are going to help them towards having much more greener energies, renewable energies. Engineering, of course, they have a lot of skills which they have developed. And that is why they are able to build this vast infrastructure globally, all this Belt and Road type of thing, because they have the skills and they can do it at low cost and faster. Here, this is mentioning about how 5 of the 10 world's longest bridges are in China. So they're making humongous types of projects already and gaining the skills from it. Now, this is to show that the science is also very much there in their bag of, if you like, accomplishments. This is the type of machine. We had something called Zeta, I think, to remember many years ago. They produced millions of degrees of temperature. This type of millions, 100 million degrees temperature is necessary for doing some basic work, and also enables us to see whether we can go in for fusion technology, which will become an energy of the future. Fusion doesn't have any nasty byproducts like fission. Fission has that plutonium, which is a nasty product, which doesn't sort of die. We have to go and put it into caves to see the byproducts of our reactors. Okay, in computing, they have the fastest computer in the world. I mean, it has enormous amount of, I think I'll just put it down here, enormous amount of instruction. Peta is 5 times mega, giga rather. Giga is billion, tetra is trillion. Anyway, as you move up, it's moving up by 1,000, in 1,000 every time. So we have enormous amount of computer capacity as well, which they have. So they're not behind technology on computing. Now, one of the things that they're also doing is that because China is so dependent on water, because water is a big resource for every country in the future, and China is looking at it because it's got these 2 big rivers, and they've got this lots of water in down this region and very little water down here, because of the desert and so on. So what they're doing is they're sort of moving that but through engineering, these mega projects, moving from the water from the south to the north through canals and pumping and so on. And this has been running for a while, and they've transferred quite a lot of water, billions of cubic meters of fresh water, so that the industrial north and where they're going to be developing these big cities, I'll just talk about it in a second, these Beijing, Tianjin, and this is called the mega city, they're going to be developing. And that's the mega city It's going to be called Jinjingji. It's a combination of Beijing and Tianjin and Hebei. This one, which is going to be housing 130 million people. As you can see, they're thinking ahead to see where to house the enormous number of people that are there in China. And they're doing it. And that size of this big city is going to be 82,000 square miles. So one city, just imagine, about 6 times the size of New York City. So a humongous sort of city. That's where it is going to be built. This is where Beijing is, and there was Tianjin is, and Hebei, this one is there. And they're going to put all this together to make one city. They build highways and connectivity and so on, so that they have their own sort of areas of competence, you know, Tianjin in industry, and then Hebei for agricultural and cultural and administrative things here in Beijing. So thinking big there. Now that's another picture of how that whole city is going to be 120 miles across, and it's going to be having high-speed trains and be able to go from one place to another very fast, so that you have an efficient transport system there. They're building these big airports as well. This is the airport that's going to handle 130 million people. And just to give you a comparison, our airport for terminals in Heathrow is about 80 million they handle every year. That's the airport that they're building. It covers a large area. That's another figure. Now, how are they going to deliver all this? They need to have some little institutions and the support for building and financial support. This is through this AIIB, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. They started that, and they have people who have joined with it. And I'll show you another one clip, not a clip, but a slide which says that UK is also part of it. Now, this one is like the World Bank, which, but the focus will be basically on developing infrastructure. So it's a big sort of institution that China has created to finance it. Okay, the BRI, the Silk Road. It's if you look at the new attempt to connect, if you like, Europe and Africa and other countries in Asia, is that old concept of Silk Road that was there in the 2nd century BC, which helped commerce between different kingdoms and empires of the day, and helped to bring in ideas, culture, inventions, and products both ways, exchanging east and west. That's the romantic sort of picture of the camels sort of ferrying the goods. That was the old route. Yeah, you go right up to Greece here from China. What did they carry? Lots of silk, spices, tea, salt, sugar, all these products here. Because Europe was rich and they wanted to buy, and Middle East was rich and they wanted to buy, so it was a thriving business of that day as well, which also is today. Anyway, it was 4,000 miles long, and we have this thing. Mongols were in charge for some time. They give the stability for the trade as well. Everybody wants trade. Even the Muslim conquest, they were very partial to trade. So all that region is very like a focus for trade and for trade routes, in fact. Now, this is the new Silk Road. This is just a little picture. I'll show you a larger picture, but this shows you the sea routes over here, and then of course the land routes there, down there. But I'll show you the land routes a bit more comprehensively. But this one is showing, I put it up because recently we had a falling out between Iran and India, because they were trying to develop a port called Shah Bahar to compete with the Gwadar port, which is the Chinese and Pakistan initiative. So India and and Iran, they wanted to have their own competitive one, but Iran has dropped them because of the pressure from USA, and India wasn't able to do the work, and Iran said, no, we're going to go the Chinese way. So they become part of the Chinese effort now, Iran. That's part of the shift in the geopolitics, as it were. Now, this is a bigger sort of picture. Now, these are the big corridors that China is developing of the Belt and Road. It connects, you see Russia there, and connects, to the Arabian Sea and down to Africa here, through Pakistan, through in the Middle East here, right up to Europe. And then down south here, we've got all this. So what these lines are indicating is that there are big highways, ports, and these blue lines here is the equivalent of those roads on the sea. And why this thing is also being planned strategically by China is that this route here can be cut off. See this narrow places here. And that's why here on the news about the Spratly Islands that China is making, these artificial islands. They want to make sure that they don't lose control of this area, because if this area gets blocked, then all the supplies and the resources get blocked, even the fuel and everything. China doesn't have fuel, no oil. So this alternate sort of routes are being created by China for strategic reasons as well, apart from trade. Okay, this is just saying that, it's got about 60 countries who are participating at the moment. And the cost is something of the order of $4 to $8 trillion, which is enormous. So we can see how that, somebody is saying that it's the most impactful infrastructure effort of our time. So you can see the vision. It's a bit like the World War II vision when Attlee came in and decided that we need to have a welfare state and so on. It's many times more than that, but nevertheless, it's of that sort of grandeur, if you like. We are having a welfare state because of Attlee and because of that vision, despite the fact that UK was very on its knees after the war, with no sort of money in the kitty. So here, another vision, which I think we should all sort of be happy that there is a vision to begin with, and not just having bases around the world. Now, 68 countries are participating. And how big is their GDP? About 40% of the total global GDP is what they control. So they're quite a big players part of that scheme. And the GDP is about 21 trillion of all these countries. So they have good power behind them. Yeah, there's another picture of the corridors that China, this Belt and Road one. They have 6 of them of these. You can see they're linking up to every part of Asia and to Europe. And of course, through this pearl necklace, they call it, to all the other countries. Now, here, this is a picture of how Africa is going to be, in fact, accessing Western China. See, Western China, we said, is very poor. And we hear a lot of this negative talk about Uyghurs and so on all the time. And that's because these areas is exceedingly poor and prone to all sorts of terrorist ideas and all that, because all these are Muslim countries around here, and they fall prey to all sorts of narratives because the economic well-being is so bad. Now, China is trying to lift them up. And of course, the press that we get here is all about internment camps and this, that, or the other. But the other way to look at it is that they're training these people so as to build industries around here, so as to profit from this link that is being set up. So it's the basis of that action is all economic, not to get rid of people as a whole or in any way or kill them off, is to try and improve their lot. So I'll talk a bit more about that, this route here about Pakistan in my lecture of this September. Okay, this is SCO. This is the equivalent of the OECD type of thing. These are the countries that they have put together, and they're pretty sort of big, because in fact, India and Pakistan belong to this talking shop, the only place that they can talk to, because they don't talk to otherwise to anybody because of Kashmir and all the other right big elements that are there that have taken over India. Now that's just a measure of how big this SCO is in terms of GDP and in terms of population. You can look at this in great detail later. Okay, this is more of that same thing. Okay, I think our time is sort of running out, so I'm going to sort of stop here and give you a chance to do some Q&A. Is that all right, Jilly?
Yeah, fine, great. I suspect there'll be quite a lot of questions.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a pretty big sort of subject anyway.
Well, I think the main thing, I'm watching for questions. So if people want to post them, either blue hands, wave frantically, or chat. I think the big question or the big problem with something like China is I mean, you've given one side, and the bias of our media is very difficult to ascertain. The independence is difficult. And we have this morning just this report from Kai Jia, who is an opposition leader, talking about how dangerous the sort of one person state for the Chinese. There's no opposition and no voices to gainsay Xi Jinping. So it's very difficult for us to know whether you're biased or we're biased or what the truth is. The vegan Muslims is one really big one.
Yeah, I think the way that I would sort of consider it to be is, is to look at it from the point of view of what they're trying to do. As a big country with a poor economic situation, they have to adopt measures which are workable, and in order to deliver sort of economic well-being, which is their priority. Political well-being is the second priority. We have the luxury of having had 300 years of democracy and all sorts of institutions to develop. And where we are at the moment is, of course, clear that we have the freedom of speech and action. Of course, in courts. But China doesn't have that. It's only in the last 30 years that it has managed to accomplish so much. And if you're going to do that, you have to go about it in a militaristic fashion. And that's what the military does. The military, what it does is it does go and does the projects. Of course, there is going to be a lot of questions about freedoms that are suppressed. And I would then simply sort of say that people who are hungry would prefer to have food on their table than to have coffee on the lounge and talk about freedoms.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's problems. I will come to you, Peter M. I'm just going to ask this one. David Shamash, is there any chance of this Chinese dictatorship collapsing in the near future?
Not likely, because, Xi Jinping has put himself in the position of president for life anyway. And this BRI is his baby, basically. So he has brought together the various efforts of China prior to his coming into a unified whole, which is this BRI, the New Silk Road. And it's a humongously big project, and it's delivering on a lot of fronts. So we'll have to see whether what he's doing at the moment is, and of course, he's uplifted so many people out of poverty as well. So it may be a few people who are dissidents and who are sort of voicing their opinions of one sort or another, but he's likely to stay because I think he's got a lot of support, because it's only one party support anyway, one party existing there. If we want to compare what we hear about China as to other countries, I mean, if you go and look at the black movement in USA and talk to some of the people, you'd get the idea that, there is injustice for hundreds of years and economic sort of distress situation for the black community there. So we get a very different picture if we keep on sort of mentioning that in the news all the time. So that's why I say that what Jeffrey Sachs is talking about is that we shouldn't be led too much astray by the media, because they have their own agenda. The media baron have their own agenda. And it's a classic case of every country saying, let's point out all the ills of the other country so that at least we can say we are so good. So we need to be a bit careful about that.
Sure. Peter M has a question.
Yes,
Yeah, go ahead.
it's relating to the rolling back of the desert and the planting of trees on a vast scale. Where is the water for that? Because you need water for trees. It's an integral part of the plan, presumably. Where is it coming from?
Yeah, I mentioned the two rivers, the Huanghe and the Yellow River, I think.
Yeah.
They are the big rivers of China, and they start from Tibet because that's the high ground, and they run down towards the south. Now, there's a huge amount of water capacity in there, as you can see from the green belt of China, which is in the east and in the south.
Mm-hmm.
So they're building canals to move that water, tap off some of the water to bring it to the north in order to sort of, provide water for not only the mega city with their building, but also to the dry arid lands which need to be supplied with water. So that's an engineering work that is already underway. So that's how they get the water.
But that is indeed, looking at the scale of what you've illustrated, it's a vast area.
Yeah, it is.
Is there sufficient water to encompass it?
Well, they're doing it, I think, in a manner which could be, done. I'm not sure they will deplete the south with all the water, but whatever excess water they have, they'll put it over there.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh yes, here we've got June Rathbone. Let me just find you.
You have to.
You.
Okay.
June,
do you think that people are going to be happier in megacities when you think of the loneliness in a city like London? Is it really the right direction to build bigger and bigger communities?
Yeah, this is a good question because, one is providing for the well-being in terms of the economic well-being. But as far as the social well-being has to be worked out as to how one could be redefining our lives in a way which will work for the better offs, which will be the case. The agricultural sort of life of the poorer people was quite hard. And of course, that's going to change with the mega cities, where they're going to have a nice flat to live in, at least, and all the communication, the entertainment, the transport to move around. So we'll have to discover a new way of living. And I think that transition has to take place, I think.
Can I just ask you, you mentioned the one child policy is gone. Is there any replacement policy, apart from the Uyghur Muslims, which we hear is sterilisation? Is there any other sort of central rule about how big your family can be?
Not too much, but they have, I think, moved away from the single type of family plan because it has depleted China of its workers, which they are finding to be a handicap. As far as the Uyghurs are concerned, the sterilization and all that, I'm not so sure how sort of true that is. But in terms of the goals that they have set out to achieve, and they have done that all over China, and I don't see why they can't do it in Western China also. The two areas which are very undeveloped and very low population as well is the West China and the Tibet. But they're bringing in communications over there, and the connectivity to the other countries through this Belt and Road scheme is going to bring some sort of commerce. And I believe that they're preparing these people for factories and for engaging in economic activity, because they didn't have that capacity available, and they're doing it. And of course, we can read in the press that comes our way that they're doing it in a manner which is very bad. Okay, I agree. Perhaps there are cases which are not acceptable, but we can see the grand picture that they're attempting to accomplish is the betterment of that region.
Yeah, I've got one final question, a very quick answer. In the planning of megacities, are they considering environmental issues, making them more green? And as much of the manufacturing is coming to the West, could the West insist on a greener approach? This is Judith Steinberg.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that I showed you is the hydropower and the solar sort of farms. Their battery technology is also sort of very, very sort of good. You know, they're as good as what Mr. Musk is producing as well. And I'll talk more about it in my next lecture, which is on Thursday, I think.
Yeah.
On Musk's projects. And of course, China is very much behind him. And that battery technology is also taking off there. And one of their motor cars or electric cars is also doing well. So I feel that their betterment, I think, has to be gauged not just in terms of economic activity, but on the social level as well and environmental level as well. That's where they're headed.
Yeah. So in general, you've got a thumbs up for them.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody, we've run out of time. So we hope to see Shafiq back on Thursday, and I'm going to close this meeting now. Thank you very much. Excellent.
Thank you, Jilly.